Good evening. A very warm welcome to today's Tata Literature Live Business Shastras. My name is Tina Nagpal and I'm a member of the Literature Live Committee. It is my pleasure to welcome our audience and speakers today. This evening, Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan, Corporate Advisor and former Executive Director, Tata Sons, will be in conversation with author and brand custodian Harish Bhat, along with Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, a National Research Professor and Science and Innovation Leader. They will be launching and discussing the book authored by Mr. Harish Bhat, Tata'S, Timeless Tales to Inspire You, a treasure trove of extraordinary stories that make the business group what it is today. I'm sure we're all in for an invigorating discussion. I'd like to remind the audience to send in questions for the Q&A segment at the end of the session. 5 questions will receive gift vouchers from Tata Click, so do send them in. I'd now like to hand over the session to our speakers. Over to you, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, to take our evening forward.
Thank you very much, Tina, and it's a great pleasure and honor for me to firstly be on the show and more importantly to be a co-panelist with Dr. Mashelkar and Mr. Harish Bhat. We are going to launch the book first, but I just wanted to say that there's some connection amongst all of us. You know, if you look at life as a journey, which in a train, all three of us on this panel today joined this train at some stage, got off the train at some other stage. Dr. Mashelkar got into the train for the first time as a young student, seeking some scholarship, which he will tell you about himself, I have no doubt. Harish Bhat came in as a mature student to seek a life and a career, and I experienced much later in my career. Life is all about stories, and stories are about life. So it's very appropriate that Harish Bhat has taken this initiative to write a book on Tata stories. It's very much more engaging than a very dry dissertation. It is my great pleasure, and I would request Harish Bhat and Dr. Mashelkar to join to do a virtual launch of this wonderful book, which we commend for the attention and hopefully the readership of our audience. Tata Stories by Harish Bhat. Thank you very much for that. We will have, having launched this book, it would be most appropriate. Again, all three of us, during our own journeys, have had our own association with the late Anil Dharkar. You'd just like to take a couple of minutes each to say something about our association. Anil Dharkar and I have been tennis partners and antagonists for about 35 years, when we were black in the hair and strong in our muscles. And we had a relationship a bit like we imagine. Federer and Nadal, very friendly off court, but very antagonistic and competitive on court. So it is on one of those tennis games that after the competitive tennis game, we sat down for a cup of tea and the idea of Tata Literature Live came. I therefore remember Anil Dharkar with great fondness, and I would like to pay my tribute to him. We are not going to observe silence and so on, but I would request Dr. Mashelkar and Harish Bhat in turn, perhaps Dr. Mashelkar first and Harish Bhat next, to say whatever they wish to say in memoriam of Anil Dharkar.
Yes. Anil to me was an icon. I admired his mercurial mind, the way he nurtured literature and art, the way he thrived on ideas. Probably he's the most multifaceted individual, one of the most multifaceted individuals that I've met in my life. My last physical meeting with him, alas, was in November 2019, when we met in NCPA. And I was fortunate enough, along with Ravi Pandit, to get the Best Business Book of the Year award at his hands. What I would do, just take a few more seconds than Gopal has allocated. I can't help but read my last mail to him in November. And I say, my dear Anil, The way you masterminded India's largest virtual lit fest of the year, and we celebrated real books, was incredible. Nowhere one saw any compromise on the quality and quantity, 150 plus of the best global speakers, Roger Penrose onwards, cerebral sessions, and invigorating experiences, which are hallmarks of Tata Lit Festival Live. Anil, thank you for giving me the honor of announcing the winners for 2020, having bestowed the same honor on me in 2019. This was really special. I've written separately to Shashi and our wonderful team. Finally, thank you, Anil, for what you are and what you have done for the society and the nation. To me, Anil was not an individual, he was an institution. Individuals go away, institutions stay. Anil will be there as an institution and as a spirit. So I pay my most respectful homage to him.
So, Mr. Gopalakrishnan and Dr. Mashelkar, I would also like to pay tribute and homage to Anil Dharkar. He built and nurtured Tata Literature Live over so many years, not just, with both head and heart, with so much passion, and he built it into the finest property of its kind in India, perhaps in the world. Such a multifaceted person, his love for the arts, for performing arts, for literature, for all things written and spoken was extraordinary. I just want to narrate an incident, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, of that passion and interest that he had. A few days before Anil unfortunately passed away, I sent him the manuscript of this very book of Tata Stories. I mailed the manuscript to him at his Malabar House residence, but he got admitted to hospital soon thereafter. And of course, we had he passed away and we had a condolence event. Sometime later, several days later, Amy, who was his partner, wrote to me that when she looked at his papers from in the hospital, she found an endorsement that he has written for this book, saying the Tata Group is unique not just in India but the world. Its story has been told and retold several times. But what Harish Bhat has done is to show its human side by gathering together a wonderful series of anecdotes involving the people who founded and ran the group. These are not only interesting in themselves, but also inspiring in their reiteration of a value system. The fact that Mr. Gopalakrishnan and Dr. Mashelkar, he wrote this when he was in hospital, and he read the manuscript perhaps, just before going to hospital or within the hospital itself, shows you the passion that he had and the commitment that he had. We will miss him. We will miss him very much. And I pray that the departed soul rest in peace.
Thank you, Dr. Mashelkar. Thank you, Harish. Having paid our tributes to the founder of Tata Lit Live, we will now progress to the book event itself. And my task is a very interesting one from my point of view. I feel that I have got a geologist, read Harish Bhat, and an astronomer, read Ramesh Mashelkar, who have landed on a planet called Tata, which is somewhere in the firmament in the galaxy. And the geologist, when he lands on a planet, takes that small step for me, but a big step for mankind, and takes out his toolkit and starts digging the ground to find out if there are minerals and water and life and all that stuff. So he digs into what is there inside what I've landed in. The astronomer, on the other hand, raises his head to the sky and says, what am I there part of? What is Tata a part of? And looks at a much larger firmament. One is the left-brained activity, the geologist, and the astronomer is the right-brained activity to marvel at what it is. Therefore, I'm going to tease out from Harish Bhat the geologist's perspective, which is through his great book, his wonderful book, by asking him to narrate some of the stories, not sequentially. I don't want Harish to go through story by story because people will read the book, but to slice across horizontally. And I'm going to give you 2 or 3 themes to illustrate from your book. And when we finish with the geologist, who's had a fascinating journey, we'll ask the astronomer to give us a 15-minute rundown as to what he's seeing in the skies from whatever he's observing. So that's the arrangement for today. So Harish, I'll start with you.
Yes, sir.
I want to choose the first theme is many people think that a leader's task is to be visionary, And some others emphasize you should be executing. But managing both together seems to pose a problem to many upcoming leaders because they say, I have time for one, I can't do the other. What can we learn from the stories that you have compiled from the history, which demonstrates to people how Tata, Jamshedji Tata, or any other Tata leader you've written about, manage vision and execution equally adroitly?
So that's a very interesting question, Mr. Gopalakrishnan. I think let me narrate two stories very quickly to illustrate how that was handled by Tata leaders. The first story I want to narrate is that of J.R.D. Tata. J.R.D. Tata had this vision of building India's finest airline, and it was actually India's first commercial airline. He flew it in 1932. It was Tata Airlines. We know it's thereafter became Air India and Indian Airlines. It was nationalized by the government and so forth. So his larger vision was to build an airline that India could be truly proud of and which would be India's flagship carrier outside anywhere in the world. But he was also a man of detail and execution. One story in this book illustrates that perhaps more than any others. He was traveling once on an international flight on Air India with L.K. Jha. L.K. Jha was one of the senior most bureaucrats in the government and the ex-director of RBI, Reserve Bank of India. So they were sitting next to each other on the flight, and suddenly J.R.D. Tata vanishes. And L.K. Jha looks here and there. He can't find J.R.D. Tata. He's hoping that in 5 or 10 minutes he will come back. But for a full hour, J.R.D. Tata does not return. This was a jumbo 747 jet with many seats and many toilets and so forth. So he's left wondering, where is this man gone? He's an icon of Indian industry. He's the chairman of this airline, and where is he gone? About an hour and 10 minutes later, J.R.D. Tata returns to his seat. And L.K. Jha asks him, where were you? Where did you go? So J.R.D. Tata said, I went to make sure that all the arrangements on the aircraft were fine, the toilets were fine. But L.K. Jha says, that would not have taken you so much time. So J.R.D. Tata tells him, I found the toilet papers incorrectly placed in the toilet. And it transpired that what J.R.D. Tata had actually done, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, was he had gone to every toilet on that aircraft and the incorrectly placed toilet papers he had changed and placed them correct. Now, this was the chairman of an airline doing it when he was flying. That shows his attention to detail and execution, while he had the vision of creating India's finest airline. And apparently he kept a notebook every time he was flying. And the moment the flight reached the destination, the points that he had put down on the notebook, he would send back to the general manager of the airline and say, these are the things that I was dissatisfied with. We need to be execution perfect. That is why when Lee Kuan Yew and the government of Singapore were looking to found their airline, Lee Kuan Yew actually told his team to go and study J.R.D. Tata's Air India. So that is vision and execution going together. But if you permit me half a minute more, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, there is another gentleman whom both of you are very familiar with is Sumant Mulgaonkar. And Sumant Mulgaonkar wanted to create a manufacturing edifice in Pune that India would be proud of, which is the Telco plant, now the Tata Motors plant in Pune. He built a wonderful plant, and many visitors came to visit it during Indira Gandhi's time. It was virtually the showcase of India, the modern plant that Telco had put up. His vision was actually to create a magnificent manufacturing force that elicited pride in the country. But also he was a man of execution, someone who said, don't accept second-rate work. I expect the best and ask for it. And Arun Maira narrates the story that Maira and his engineers had believed that they had created India's first fully automated transfer machine for manufacturing cylinder heads for engines. So he proudly goes up to Mulgaonkar and says, here it is, sir, India's first machine, which has been created for manufacturing cylinder heads. Mulgaonkar inspects the machine very carefully. Goes back, he says nothing. Later, he calls Arun Maira to his office and says, Maira, did you notice the hydraulic pipes on that machine? They were not all vertical. Please go and see for yourself. Something should be done to correct it right now. And Maira goes and notices that Mulgaonkar's observation was right. So execution in terms of an eye for detail, manufacturing detail. Mulgaonkar is the managing director of the company, coming and looking at hydraulic pipes, whether they're absolutely vertical or not. What a message that sends out, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, about the attention to detail and execution. I've narrated both those stories in great detail, but these are interesting anecdotes which marry vision and execution.
Wonderful. That's terrific. I think it's good to give across the 40 stories examples as you have done. And these are very inspiring for young people who think that either you can be a visionary or you can be an execution. And neither was the world that way at that time, as you have just demonstrated, nor will it be in the future. We want people who can do both at the same time. They should be and managers, visionary and execution if they want to be leaders. So that's great. Thanks a lot. I want to touch upon a second point and ask you to illustrate from examples from your book. There is the perception created maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago through American business literature and therefore Indian business literature that leaders of businesses are objective. They have big square jaws, steely blue eyes, and they take tough decisions. And the iconic person we know was leading General Electric in the 70s, the 80s and the 90s. We know all that story. And that certainly when I was a youngster became my sort of image of what a tough business leader should be. But one of the features of your stories in your book is that a leader must learn not to lead through head or heart, but through head and heart. And if you can't do both simultaneously, a bit like the first area we explored, execution and vision, you must have head and heart, then you're not going to be a great leader. I found this a bit fascinating and wondered whether you would like to narrate, maybe, I don't know, 2-3 stories from your book.
Yes, Mr. Gopalakrishnan. I think many stories bring this out in Tata Stories, but I want to take the example of another leader from the Tata Group to illustrate this. And it's a company that I have worked in for a long time, Titan, and the person who founded Titan is Xerxes Desai. You've known him well, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, for 7 years. Now, when Xerxes Desai founded Titan, he founded it, the first watch factory came up at Hosur in Tamil Nadu. This was a joint venture with the Tamil Nadu government. I think all the elements which went into the design of the watch and the creation of the technology for the watch, all those were led primarily by the head. You know, what kind of technology, what kind of logic goes into the watch, how it is to be designed to capture the imagination of Indian consumers. There was a lot of intuition and logic, but it was primarily head.
These were mechanical watches, was it? Or
this was a quartz watch. He decided to go the quartz way. So all those decisions were taken. They may be aesthetic decisions or technology decisions or sales and distribution decisions of setting up India's first modern retail outlet as World of Titan. Those were taken with the head. But when he founded the factory in Hosur, and as per the joint venture agreement, they had to create some employment within Tamil Nadu. He decided not to go with trained people and to take them from other industries, you know, people who have been trained in other companies. He actually asked his people to go to small towns in Tamil Nadu, towns like Krishnagiri, towns like Namakkal, go to small towns in Tamil Nadu, look at students who have passed their 12th standard and encourage them to come and join Titan. I'm told many of those principals had to be convinced. What is this Titan? Why should my students go and join? But when they heard it was a Tata company, they said, okay, there must be something in it. He created housing for them in Hosur, because this was the first time they were coming out of their house, 12th standard school children. He trained them into becoming expert horologists. And many of those people, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, now have completed their graduation, their post-graduation, their families, they have prospered in their lives. So he created livelihoods for people who otherwise may not have had this opportunity at all by choosing those school children out of schools in the Namakkals and Krishnagiris of Tamil Nadu. That was a decision, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, that I think was taken with his heart, not with his head, because he felt that this is the best way to give back to the community. And which is why, you know, when Mr. Xerxes Desai passed away, I had gone down for his funeral in Hosur. Half the town turned out to see for the funeral procession was about 3 kilometers long on the dusty roads of Hosur, from the factory all the way to the crematorium, and half the town turned out because he was a man who created livelihoods for people in that town. What better gift can a man give this world? So that is a decision, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, clearly taken with the heart. And there are many other stories here of Jamshedji Tata, JRD Tata, you know, Rusi Modi, all of them displaying decisions.
Tell us one more of head and heart.
So the other story that I see of both head and heart, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, is that of Dorabji Tata, the second chairman of the Tata Group. He was a very logical, left brain person. He in fact consolidated many of the businesses that Jamshedji Tata had founded. He completed the execution of the Indian Institute of Science and brought it into fruition. He completed the execution of Tata Steel, and by 1913, steel was being produced by steel ingots. And I'm told he was a very, very hard taskmaster, hard on himself and hard on others who worked with him. So he was really, and he was very careful about the money that was expended and what was invested and so forth. So he was in those 20 to 30 years that he was chairman of the Tata Group, there was a very careful process of consolidating the businesses of it. So he was a man of the head. He took many decisions on where the Walwan dam should come up, how the electrical power should be brought into Bombay, how Tata Steel should expand and what the expansion plan should be. All those were decisions driven by the head. But in 1924, when Tata Steel was on the verge of collapse because Japanese demand for steel had come down and demand in other parts of Europe had also got scattered by World War I, he got a telegram from Jamshedpur saying, we don't have money to pay the wages of our workers. Without pausing for a minute, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, Lady Maherbai Tata, his wife, and he pledged their entire wealth of 1 crore rupees. That was his entire wealth at that time. It would be a much larger amount of money in today's currency, which included the 6th largest diamond in the world, the Jubilee diamond. They pledged their personal wealth to the Imperial Bank of India, which is now State Bank of India, to take a loan to rescue Tata Steel and make sure that no worker was retrenched, jobs were protected, and livelihoods were protected. That decision, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, can only come from the heart. It's not a decision of the head. Eventually, it proved to be a very good decision also logically because Tata Steel went on to prosper in the 1930s and you know the fine institution that it is today. But at that point in time, Dorabji Tata's heart must have bled for Tata Steel and the workers who were working there, which is why he took this call of pledging his entire wealth to get a loan for Tata Steel, which was on the collapse. So that's another very interesting story, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, the story of the Jubilee diamond and how it is probably the most fortunate diamond in the world, if I may call it.
Certainly fortunate for Tata's because it saved Tata Steel. Yeah. Had it not been. But I want to ask you a question which is a bit tangential but related to the story you just mentioned. Tata Steel at that time was a public limited company.
Yes.
Responsibility according to the law is limited to his or her share capital. So faced with the bank, Imperial Bank in this case, which had given the loan, the promoter, as we call him nowadays, came and gave his personal wealth to save the company. Right? Legally, it was not required. And this is what is an act of the heart, you said. Is there a lesson for that for promoters in modern times?
I would say yes, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, because eventually there is a legal responsibility, and the legal responsibility is limited, like you said, by the shareholding in the company and the promoter being one of the shareholders. But the promoter's moral responsibility, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, is to always seek the prosperity of the company that they have promoted and put into this world. And my belief is that promoters need to step out of their zones of extreme comfort sometimes to do that. So I believe it is as relevant today as it was in those days.
Thank you, Harish. I think that's a very nice example. I would like to add a small one very briefly of my own. Are you there, Dr. Mashelkar? Because both of you are frozen.
No, I'm here, Mr. Gopalakrishnan.
But your pictures are frozen, so I suppose we'll carry on. Your voices are clear. Yeah. When the Tata Finance episode happened in 2000 or 2001, I remember we were in a Tata Chemicals meeting and a shareholder was weeping about how his savings had been taken to dust. And Mr. Ratan Tata stood up and said, on behalf of Tata Sons, I assure you that not one of you will lose a penny, a rupee in your investment. And finally, Tata Sons did return the money, and the total bill to Tata Sons, which I know because I was the director of Tata Sons, was, if I remember right, about 800 crores. So it's the equivalent of a Jubilee diamond. You gave away 800 crores from the promoter, which is Tata Sons. So thanks for that very nice example of the Jubilee diamond, which of course is very much more dramatic and has a historical context to it. Do you think we should log off and log on so that you are not frozen, both of you, for some reason? Or can everybody else see them well?
Gopal, as I see it, you are frozen. I don't know what Harish is seeing.
Stakeholder in the business, but the stakeholder being integrated into the decision of the business. He's just not an addendum to which you deal whenever you want to. Do you think I've read it right? And if so, can you give some stories from your book?
Yes, Mr. Gopalakrishnan. So I'll keep speaking. If you wish to, you can log out and come back. The story that I'd like to narrate, Mr. Gopalakrishnan's question to me was about keeping other stakeholders in mind. And this actually goes down to the very first story in the Tata Group, which is the first industrial enterprise that Jamshedji Tata, the founder of the group, founded. This was the Empress Mills in Nagpur. He founded it in 1876. So remember, it was 145 years ago when he founded this mills. And actually, he made it one of the most profitable textile mills in the country. He did that by ensuring that he used, ring spindles, which were the latest technology at that time. Even the mills in UK were not using it. He took a risk and used it. Nagpur was the center of the cotton industry. He used long stapled cotton to produce very good quality of garments. And he made it a very, very prosperous enterprise. Within a few years, shareholders had multiplied their wealth several times. So it was very good for shareholders, the Empress Mills itself. But he also realized that shareholders were not the only stakeholder in the enterprise. He soon realized that employees were one of the key stakeholders in this enterprise. And therefore, it was important for him to do something for employees as well, in equal measure. So one of the things that he did at the Empress Mills, and let me just read out these dates to you. One of the things that he did at Empress Mills is that in 1887, he established a pension fund. For the first time, a pension fund being established in India for workers. In 1895, he established an accident compensation scheme for workers. In 1901, he introduced the concept of a provident fund. All of us who work in companies, we think provident fund is taken for granted. We see our salary slips every month, and there is a PF contribution by the company and a PF contribution by the individual. But let's remember that this was first introduced in the Empress Mills in 1901. Each of these schemes, he thought, were for employee welfare and pioneering innovations in Indian industry, which established a new way of doing business. Actually, if you read one of the stories in this book, which is about Empress Mills, you will see that, he went to the extent of looking at ventilation in the mills. He said, we have paid the greatest attention to sanitary arrangements. I'm reading out a quotation from his speech in 1895, and constantly studied this question with a view to improve them. We have provided fans for ventilation, humidifiers to prevent the effects of extremely dry air, statues for cooling the rooms, which must by the nature of our business get hotter in the hot weather. But we are still not satisfied with what we have done. That's what he goes on to say. We are about to try a new scheme in the shed. We are confident that if it succeeds in nothing else, it's sure to succeed in one thing, giving an equally distributed supply of fresh, free and pure air to our work people. So, look at he was the chairman of the company, and he's going into the arrangements of sanitary arrangements for his workers and pure air being provided for his workers. So Jamshedji Tata spoke once again and explained why he did this. And that comes back to Mr. Gopalakrishnan's question of shareholders versus stakeholders. He says, listen to this quotation carefully. It's a quotation which keeps resonating in my mind. We do not claim to be more unselfish, more generous, or more philanthropic than other people. But we think we started on sound and straightforward business principles, considering the interests of our shareholders our own. So remember, the interests of our shareholders are our own, and creating wealth for them is very important. But he goes on to say, considering the interests of our shareholders our own, and the health and welfare of our employees, the sure foundation of our prosperity. He established a girls' school for the Empress Mills established a girls' school for girl children. 9 night schools were established. He set up gymnasia in those days for people to work out. He had a weekly lecture on different subjects so that workers within the mills could get exposed to different subjects and their perspectives could grow. Each year, a health week was organized to highlight various diseases and how workers could keep themselves and their families safe. So it boggles the mind to think that Of course, he created one of the most profitable enterprises of the country with Empress Mills. But all these things that he did for the workers, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, clearly he saw that shareholders were not his only franchise. He had to do something more for the employees and the community. And then I think it grew in his mind, employees and community. Eventually, by the time he went into the Indian Institute of Science, Tata Steel phase, he was all the time obsessed with and thinking of the nation and how he could do things which would build the nation. Mr. Gopalakrishnan, you're muted. Can you just unmute yourself here?
I love the use of the word obsessed. Before I move to the astronomer who's gazing at the stars, last question for you. Nowadays there are a lot of pink papers which give the best bank, best company of the year award and so on, most respected. Is it possible to love a company?
Yeah. So it's a question that should be researched much further, Mr. Gopalakrishnan. But in an age where most customers, particularly in the Western world, are skeptical of the corporate world, I think I see a distinction between respecting a company and loving a company. A company gets respected when you do economically very well, you produce products and services which become iconic. You get respected if your market capitalization reaches a certain level, or if you're fated as the company of the year by media. So respect comes from a host of those things. Love is a much deeper emotion, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, than respect. This is my view. And love is a deeper emotion. And love, whether it's in life between two people or whether it is a corporate and people, love comes from doing things unconditionally. For your partner, for your spouse, for the people that you work with, when you unconditionally give back to people, then you're able to generate love in people's minds. And I believe that Jamshedji Tata, JRD Tata, Ratan Tata, all the chairmen of the group have given back unconditionally. Indian Institute of Science was an unconditional gift to the nation at Jamshedji Tata's time. Dorabji Tata's time taking India into the Olympics was an unconditional gift to the nation. JRD Tata's time, the first Tata Memorial Hospital in Parel was an unconditional gift to the nation, as was TIFR and TISS. In Mr. Ratan Tata's time, the Tata Medical Center at Kolkata and everything that is now happening around cancer care in the country is an unconditional gift to the nation. So love comes when we unconditionally gift back to the people. And that's what JRD Tata also says. What has come from the people goes back to the people several times over. When that happens, I think there is a fair chance that corporates can also generate love in the minds of people.
What a wonderful answer. So it is possible to love Tata as dearly as you, not as dearly, but like you love your wife or your son or your daughter. Lovely, lovely. We like that very much. I have another question for you, but I'm going to hold it because like a good geologist, you've taken your kurpi and dug the ground and told us what is inside this planet called Tata. But we have an astronomer who also landed with you in the same spaceship on Tata, but he's looking up to the sky and with a poetic glaze in his eyes, he is telling you what's around Tata and what is Tata a part of. So I'm not going to ask you questions, Dr. Mashelkar, because it's easier to question a geologist than an astronomer. Over to you for the next 10-15 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think let me straight away admit that the fact that I'm on this call and participating in this event, the fact that what I am today is because of Tata'S. Otherwise, it would not have been possible. Why do I say that? I was born in a very poor family. I was born in Mashe, a village called Mashe. My father died when I was 6 and my mother was illiterate, brought me to Mumbai in search of a job. She did actual menial work to bring me up. 2 meals a day was a challenge. I studied under street lights, walked barefoot until I was 12. At SSC's secondary school certificate exam, I had scored, I was 11th among 135,000 students. And yet I was going to do studies. And it was the 60 rupees Tata scholarship, which made it possible for me to study. And that is how actually I'm here. That's the first point I want to make. The second point was that it was not just throwing 60 rupees at you. They really made a man out of a monkey. You know, I mean, in a sense, when I was interviewed, when a tray containing tea and milk and other things came, I did not know how to make a tea, for example. I studied in a Marathi school. My English was not so great. Mr. Malegawala, who took care of me at that time, he actually would ask a Parsi lady to help me with English. I did not know how to debate, for example, or how to communicate. I would interrupt. You know, and you have seen me in some meeting that we attend for 1 hour, I don't speak. That training came from there, as a matter of fact. So they really sort of build me up, taking to museums and so on and so forth. So that's the first point I would like to make. I owe everything to them, and there are so many Mashelkars that they have created. So I'm very happy, Harish, that you have a chapter on scholarships in your book, basically,
Yes.
and how some of the leaders of the country have. So that is first part. The second part is that we all know that education is most critical, and I normally try to sell this idea by saying that, look, I'm a scientist, so I must start with an equation. And then I narrate to them, this is a real story. Somebody said, what is the most powerful equation that has been there? And the first answer is Newton, second law, F equal to ma. The second then said, no, Einstein, E equal to mc square, etc. And then they turned to me and I said, no, it is E equal to F. Education is equal to future, right? And then I said, because I'm a scientist, I have to prove it. And then I prove it by giving the examples of Ratan Tata and me, if you can believe it. For example, the first example I always give is 17 March 2000, when in Rashtrapati Bhavan, both Ratan and I got Padma Bhushan at the hands of K.R. Narayanan, another Tata scholar. So I was a Tata scholar, and Ratan Tata was the head of the Tata family, and a Tata scholar who became president gave him that proves it. In fact, there has been a great coincidence. You know, in 2004, when the National Leadership Awards were first introduced, they went to Ratan from industry, Ilaben Bhat for her societal work, and me as a science and technology. Similarly, for example, 2011, American Academy of Arts and Science, 1780 it was formed by Benjamin Franklin, George Washington. There have been 200 Nobel laureates who are members and all sorts of great people, but only 7 Indians. Can you believe it? It is 6th and 7th Indian signed in the book at the same time, because Ratan had got it in 2010, I got it 2011. He couldn't make it. As coincidence would have it, we signed in the same book, one after the other. Now, in 1960, if somebody had told me that this is what is going to happen, I would not have believed it. And therefore, this education and opportunity by which Tata'S have built, I think people is extremely important. The second point I want to make from my memories is that I remember getting a call from Ratan to join the board of TCS in 2005. But I was the DG of CSR, I could not. And then I got on to Tata Motors, as you know. And that was a big training for me, to be honest. That was the first time, because I got involved in audit committee as a chairman of safety, health, environment, but most importantly, the corporate social responsibility. And I had sort of an insight into how they actually work. And that was a great learning for me, because for my life. So when we say that it's not just a scholarship, but the training later on to make Mashelkar what he is, I think it goes much beyond. The third point I want to make is, I think maybe Gopal, you were also there in Goa when all the senior people met, and I was asked to speak on innovation as a way of life. And if you remember, I made a statement about taking risks and daring. And I said that a CEO friend of mine was telling me that we don't hang people who make mistakes, but we do hang people who take risks. And there was a big laughter. There is one person who didn't laugh. That was Ratan. And Ratan asked me during tea time, how do we promote sort of risk taking? So I said, honor those who dare to try, even if they have failed, basically. And that is how that Daring to Try program actually started. And Gopal, what is most important I want to say is that that became a culture. I mean, I remember when Tata Motors Limited, they had this awards function, for example, there was an exhibition where there were 3 stalls. One stall was, yes, I did it. I took up a challenge, I did it. Second was, I have a difficult problem. I'm just at it. And the third was, we tried, but. Can you just imagine the culture actually sort of penetrating? That is another thing that I remember. The penalty, I mean, second last point that I want to make is the impact, for example, that we have, that daring to try, not just in research and innovation, but, you have a brilliant chapter on Tata Tata'S, for example, you know, how that acquisition was done. And of course, JLL's story or, you know, the Koro story and other stories are sort of typical. So I just want to narrate one incident to you. Again, that was a coincidence. Just Business School of Cambridge had invited me to give the first lecture in the innovation series, the BP innovation series. And on the same day, as luck would have it, as coincidence, Ratan got an honorary doctorate from Cambridge. And in the evening, there was a dinner that was hosted in his honor. I was also invited. And I remember that the Cavendish lab director was sitting next to me. He pointed towards Ratan and he says, you are looking at an individual, you know, who is the highest employer of British in Britain in manufacturing. Can you just imagine how I must have as a matter of faith? So this, actually these examples illustrate to you sort of what to do. The last point I want to make is really, you know, this Tata affirmative action program, basically, which actually deals with equal opportunity, inclusive growth, dealing with Dalits, dealing with Adivasis, etc. And I've been fortunate enough, privileged really, to have been its chairman for almost 10 years now. And we have brought out, by the way, a book just recently in terms of what we have been able to do in 10 years. And it is absolutely fascinating. And in this AA Matters, in the post-pandemic era, what 2021 companies have done, it is absolutely incredible the way lives have been built. And we have been focusing on employment, employability, entrepreneurship, education, essential embodiments, and so on and so forth, you know. And it is run in the style of Tata Business Excellence Model. 21 companies who constitute 90% of the group turnover actually participate in this, and they are making such a huge sort of difference. So I think the wheel has turned the full circle. That 6 rupees per month made me what it was. And then coincidentally, I have been involved in these corporate social. The last point I would love to make is to read out what Jamshedji had said. In a free enterprise, the community is not just another stakeholder in business, but it is, in fact, the very purpose of its existence. I think that's a tremendous statement. And therefore, I want to recall, and Gopal, thank you for giving this bit when you wrote for the first time in the book that I had edited, Timeless Inspirator. Because Jamshedji Tata, just as you mentioned a little earlier, 1892 he created the Charitable Trust, which was ahead of Rockefeller Trust, ahead of Andrew Carnegie Trust, ahead of Ford Foundation, ahead of Lord Mountbatten, Lord Liverpool Trust, and so on and so forth. So it was not just about doing it first. Day before yesterday, a report has come which really gladdened my heart. It is that Edelgi Imran's report, which actually shows, and they of course use the NEP, etc., the NP, to show that Jamshedji Tata was the biggest philanthropist with $102 billion, in the last century. And then come all these Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and George Soros, etc., etc. So he not only was the first one, but the kind of impact that he has made. So my final point is, I love the book, Harish. In my mail, I told you have done a great service to the society, as a matter of fact. But I think the most important part of this is the timelessness of these stories. And I remember editing this book, Timeless Inspirator, reliving Gandhi. Because I asked 50 people that I respect, what do you think about Gandhi in the 21st century? And they said he's even more relevant. I would simply reword the title of your book by saying Timeless Inspirator Reliving Jamshedji. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. That was a very passionate deposition that you gave. One of the nice things about our program is it's not about numbers, ROC, ranking in the world, but it's about people, human beings, love. Where can you find Business Shastra, which discusses these sorts of subjects? You know, I would have hesitated, having been a Tata employee for several years, to have raised the subject of the Hurun list. You're quite right. It would make every Tata person proud to be that some third party has done this study, which we ourselves didn't know, frankly. I didn't know that Jamshedji Tata is a moniker for Tata Group because they've taken 100 years and no single person. But Harish, I was a bit interested to see that in your book, there is not much reference to the Tata Trusts. So I was wondering, and there is not much reference to TCS either, which is our new currency. So I was just wondering whether is it an oversight or is it a postponed action?
See, there are a few very emotive stories from the Tata Trusts, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, within the book. So the entire fight against cancer, which actually has been the Tata Trust, the Dorabji Tata Trust set up the Tata Memorial Hospital, and then the entire journey after that, the Tata Medical Center in Kolkata, currently several cancer hospitals coming up in several parts of the country. So that is one story which I think revolves around the Tata Trust completely and the work that they've done. As much as, you know, the story that Dr. Mashelkar was talking about, the J.N. Tata Endowment Scholarships, which is also part of the Tata Trust, is the other story that I have narrated here. And like Dr. Mashelkar rightly said, he's a Tata scholar. President K.R. Narayanan is a Tata scholar. The first Tata scholar was actually a lady doctor, Dr. Kama, who went abroad for studies. So that is a very interesting story, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, which is derived from the Tata Trust once again. But the Tata Trust have so many other inspiring stories, which can probably constitute a book or more than a book by themselves. As far as TCS is concerned, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, in a lighter vein, you have written a very beautiful book about it very recently. So there is no point in reinventing the wheel. But at the same time, I would say that TCS has very powerful, astonishing stories. And perhaps I will keep them for the next book that I write, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, another 40 stories derived from various parts of the Tata Group. So I've not covered stories of, there is a story about Mr. Ramudurai and the development of the Eka supercomputer here. Mr. Ramudurai was vice chairman and MD of TCS. But TCS has so many fascinating stories, the Passport Seva Kendra in India and what they've done to revolutionize a citizen service within the country, or what the company is now doing around digital and digital technologies. Those would be fascinating stories to narrate. And I would look forward sometime in the future to researching those stories.
Okay, that's great. I agree with you. I have co-authored the TCS book, and TCS is a great example. They call themselves a technology company, but actually they are a people company.
Yeah.
Technology is the playing field on which people are doing things. So you will find many stories. That is wonderful. Dr. Mashelkar, Mr. Bhat, it's wonderful to have this conversation, and I'm very privileged, A, to read your book, B, to be able to coordinate this session. But I think somebody far more charming than any of us, Tina Nagpal, is waiting at the other end, because the audience has questions, and I think Tina will conduct that bit for some time. Please go ahead, tell us the audience questions and direct it to any of us.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Harish Bhat, Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, and Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan for keeping us captivated with such insightful stories. So we do have some very interesting questions lined up today. I'm going to mention that these are the Tata Click voucher questions. The first question is from Mohit Pava. He says that working with head and heart is quite important, but how do we foster these qualities in young entrepreneurs or business students?
Harish, you want to go?
See, I would say, this one of the reasons I wrote this book, Tina, Tata Stories, is so that young entrepreneurs and business students can read these inspiring stories from the history of the group. And when you see that working with Head and Heart has actually delivered splendid results, for the Tata Group, then I think young entrepreneurs who want to build sustainable enterprises will also get inspired that this is the way to go, which is why I have not tried to explain concepts in this book. I have put forward real life stories as they played out. Like Mr. Gopalakrishnan said, I've dug and extracted these stories and put them out. So these are real life stories. Entrepreneurs and business students should take heart from these stories and see that Head and Heart has succeeded. That's what I'd like to say, Mr. Gopalakrishnan.
Thank you. I just want to add on page 75 of this book. For those, I would encourage people to read the book, of course, but I will quote. There was a school teacher called K.C. Bhansali who wrote to J.R.D. Tata saying what are his guiding principles of his life and success. J.R.D. Tata replied, it's a terrific letter, it's 200 words, but it's like a little Bhagavad Gita, But the last point, the first point say you must strive for excellence, think of the nation and all that sort of stuff. The last point says that this is the principle he has followed, that good human relations not only bring great personal rewards, but are essential to the success of any enterprise. Tina, what do you want?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Dr. Mashelkar wants to say something.
Can I add something to that? Because this is a very important question.
Please do. Yes.
Young entrepreneurs must have three things: innovation, compassion, and passion. If you miss one of them, you can't make it. That's the point number one. Point number two is there is what is called as doing well, doing for yourself, for shareholders, stakeholders, etc. But there is something called doing good. Now, normally we say first doing well and then doing good, like Bill Gates did. He made a lot of money and then created a foundation. But there is something called doing well by doing good. That means doing good itself is a great business. That's what Tata'S have sort of also done. In my mother's name, there is this Raghunath Mashelkar Inclusive Innovation Award, where all the awards go to affordable excellence, where we make high technology work for the poor. And all of them are making a big difference to the society, but at the same time, all of them are making profits. So the two are not sort of, and they are all young people in the age group of 25 to 30. So this can be done. I think that's the basic.
Wonderful. So some true life inspiration and a lot of really valuable, I think, points made by everyone. We have one more question from Raghavendra Badrinarayana. He asks, how do Tata leaders manage a big behemoth with both social and economic interests intact?
So
can I take a crack at that?
Yes, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, you've been one of our foremost leaders, so I think you should speak. Yeah.
Who's the name of the gentleman who asked the question?
Mr. Raghavendra Badrinarayana.
Mr. Raghavendra Badrinarayanan, think of how does a mother, your wife, your daughter, whoever, your neighbor's wife, raise a child, taking care of love for the child and yet instilling discipline in the child. It is not one or the other for her. Both have to be done. And each mother does it to her best ability. Businessmen should be to their enterprise what mothers are to their children. Being able to do this and that, even if they are opposites. Harish, you wanted to say something?
No, I think that is a wonderful analogy, Mr. Gopalakrishnan. I don't want to add to that. That I think explains this completely.
Absolutely. I can't think of any other enterprise that truly sort of represents the merging of these two aspects more than the Tata Group. I think that would be the first name that comes for everybody. Next, we have a question from Mr. Amitabh Tarapdar. He asked that data is regarded as a new black gold. How can the Tata Group, using data as its backbone, make India super competitive and fulfill India's 5 trillion economy dream?
This is squarely Harish's, because he's up to date and we are not.
So I would tell Mr. Amitabh Tarapdar there are many initiatives that Tata Group companies are taking to be able to leverage data in a good way to serve their customers much better, serve them to personalize offerings, to offer the best customer service, to ensure that customer experience at every touch point is very good, whether it be retail stores or auto dealers or after sales service, after sales service points. Data is also being used to make manufacturing operations more productive. Data is also being used to take the right decisions as far as company strategies are concerned. And there is a lot of work around data and analytics which is happening. And of course, with a company like Tata Consultancy Services, which specializes in digital data and analytics, I think they're also leading the way on this front. So that's the answer I'd like to provide, Tina. I cannot get into details about what each company is doing on this front, but clearly data is, to use a cliched expression, data is very much the oil of the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Mr. Bhat. We have one very interesting question. I have a personal interest in this one. This is from Nisha Lal. She asked, what role do women leaders play in the Tata leadership programs? And a similar question which came in a little later is from Hiru M, who asks if there are any stories that you can share that inspire leaders on the importance of women leaders in corporate India.
Harish.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. One of the stories in this book is the story of Lady Maherbai Tata. She is, according to me, one of the first, if not the first, feminist icon in India. And she lived in the 1900s to 1920s. She had a very independent mind. She actually evangelized the Sarda Act, which was trying to make the marriage of, child marriage illegal in India. Not just in India, she went to the Battle Creek College in the United States and delivered a stirring oration about why this societal malpractice should be removed from the country. She went on to play tennis, like Mr. Gopalakrishnan, I think, who is interested in tennis. She went on to play tennis and won about 65 tennis tournaments, including being the first Indian woman to be drawn to play at Wimbledon. I'm sorry, at the Olympics, not at Wimbledon. So Lady Maherbai Tata is a stirring story of a woman leader, which has been narrated in this book. But Mr. Gopalakrishnan would know, and Dr. Mashelkar would know, that perhaps one of the earliest woman CEOs in India was Simone Tata, who ran Lakme for several years as its chairman, as its chairperson. That's a stirring story, an inspiring story once again of Simone Tata and the way she built Lakme. When I joined as a TA's officer in 1987, one of the people that I looked up to was actually, I loved marketing, and one of the most expert marketers in the group was a lady called Camellia Punjabi, who was the head of the marketing team at the Taj Group of Hotels, now IHCL, who's also served as an exceedingly good role model. Today, where I work at the group center of the Tata Group, the group CHRO, Nupur Malik, the head of digital in the group, Aarti Subramaniam, the chief economist of the group, Rupa Purushothaman, they're all women leaders who are setting examples to people across the group, as much as several CXOs in Tata Group companies who are women leaders now. We have some way to go. But one program I'd like Mr. Gopalakrishnan probably to touch on is a program that he kind of developed during his time in the Tata Group, which Mr. Gopalakrishnan is the second career internship program for women coming back to the workforce. And it's a program you developed, so I'll leave it to you to mention that.
Well, I won't go into any great detail, except to say that it is what it describes, SCIP, Second Career Internship Program, which is started by my colleagues in HR and communications department. And I don't know the latest numbers, but I'm delighted to see that at the time I was there, at least that data, we would recruit between 5 and 10 women who had taken breaks for maternity. Very talented women, by the way, chartered accountants, people who went to IIM, and we trained them, refreshed them. And some of them are doing marvelous work. Some of them are still in touch with me. So, but we have a long way to go, a very long way to go. If I may just add a little rider to your, since you said I love tennis, which I do, Lady Maherbai Tata and Dorabji Tata used to play tennis at the Bombay Gymkhana. Because the Bombay Gymkhana is opposite their house. You know, Esplanade House is exactly opposite Bombay Gymkhana. And to this day, every year, Bombay Gymkhana has the Maherbai Tata Memorial Tennis Tournament. And they keep calling me every year to come and give away the prizes. Though I try to pass that burden or task on to Noel or Simone when she was more active. But I just want to know that they created not only long-lasting companies, but long-lasting tennis tournaments as well.
Thank you so much. True legacies. I'm going to ask one last question, and then maybe we can have a few last words from everybody and then wrap up. This is actually a big question, and Dr. Mashelkar did touch upon it a little bit, but when and how did philanthropy begin in the house of Tata'S? This was asked by Nitin Raj.
So, Harish, you want to go first?
Can you repeat that question, Tina? When and how did?
Yes. Philanthropy begin in the house of Tata'S?
Yeah. So the research and study I have done shows that it was ingrained in Jamshedji Tata's mind ever since he founded this enterprise. And the quotation that Dr. Mashelkar talked about the community being center stage and the purpose of the corporation's existence. So right from the time of Empress Mills, I have narrated several initiatives that he took to give back to the employees in the community in Nagpur. But when was the first philanthropic trust set up? That was 1892. Like Dr. Mashelkar said, the J.N. Tata Endowment Trust was established in 1892. So if you're asking for a formal date, then 1892, the establishment of the first trust would be the date. But my belief is that this was in Jamshedji Tata's mind ever since the first industrial enterprise that he established. And after that, giving back has happened virtually every year and every decade.
Can I add to that a little bit?
Yeah.
I'll just take a minute, Dr. Mashelkar, before you can comment if you wish. I have searched high and low because many people have asked me this question. It has occurred to me. Was the root of this idea in spirituality, in religion? I've asked those who understand Zoroastrianism. But I've now come to the conclusion, based on my half-baked research, it is in the man himself. He had a religion of humanism. And all his statements, and Harish's book has those statements, I'm not going to repeat them, are seeping in this sauce called Dusron ki bhalai karna. And whether it came out of religion or not is a scholar's debate. I also want to mention two facts and a conclusion that I am drawing from it, which is a conclusion and it's not factually borne out. He established this trust in 1892. It's the world's first trust. I mean, many people don't know this. Because I have searched high and low. I know there was a Rockefeller Trust established in 1876, but that was for a tax saving. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, that's up to Mr. Rockefeller. But it was wound down because the IRS fellows got onto it and it was closed. So the first charitable trust was in 1892. All the others, as Dr. Mashelkar mentioned, came later. Now, between 1892 and 1898, Harish's book mentions that Jamshedji Tata traveled and he met Swami Vivekananda and had some conversations with him, and that's reflected in the book. Now, when Swami Vivekananda went in 1898, he had the Chicago Parliament of Religions. One of his visitors who came to meet him was Swami Vivekananda, was John D. Rockefeller, the world's richest man. And Swami Vivekananda, I don't know who influenced whom. Now, this is where I'm guessing. Swami Vivekananda was asked a question by John D. Rockefeller that, what do you expect me to do? He said, no, you're the world's richest man, aren't you? So he said, yes. He said, do you think you're the richest man because you're the smartest man? He said, must be. He said, how much richer than the average American are you? He gave some number, 100. He said, do you think you're 100 times smarter than the average American? He said, it must be. He said, has it ever occurred to you that you're a pipe? You're a conduit? That this money is meant for somebody else? And John D. Rockefeller walked away in a huff. That is 1898. But within 12 years, he must have thought about it. He set up the Rockefeller Foundation. 1912 was when Rockefeller Foundation was set up. I'd like to believe, and this may be romanticized in my mind, that there was some connection, spiritual connection, philosophical connection between the thoughts in Jamsetji's mind, the thoughts in Vivekananda's mind, and the action of Rockefeller. And if more and more companies, not only in India but in the world, would think that this is not a side activity after you made all your profit, I think the world will be better for it. Dr. Mashelkar, any other comments before she closes?
No, just one line. The greatest religion is religion of humanism. That's it. As simple as that. It's a one-liner answer.
Thank you so much. This has truly been such an illuminating discussion and such wonderful stories that we've all discovered today. I'd just like to remind everybody, if your name was called for a Tata Click voucher, please write to us with your contact details at the following email address, info@litlive.in. And to close the evening, I'd like to thank our partners, the Tata Group, our wonderful panel of speakers, and of course, our wonderful audience for joining us today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you and good night.
On behalf of my colleagues, Dr. Mashelkar and Mr. Harish Bhat, can I thank you, Tina, and all the people behind the screen, Amy and many other friends in Tata'S for hosting us. We had a great pleasure in preparing for this. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.